effective January 1st, 2020, remote online notarization, also known as e-closings, those terms are used interchangeably. Effective January 1st, 2020, they were legal in Florida. We were ready for the remote online notarization, but we were expecting kind of a slow rollout because it's a new technology, and new technology generally is a little slow on the uptake. But then COVID-19 came around and that changed everything. So now we're having inquiries about remote online notarization or e-closings for people's real estate transactions, for signing their wills, and notarizing any document. The information I'm going to give to you applies to almost any document that needs to be notarized, but we're going to talk about it in the context of the closing because that's where it's coming up most frequently now in our environment. So to start with, a remote online notarization session looks a lot like a Zoom meeting with multiple people or a GoToMeeting session with multiple people. If you weren't familiar with those platforms before the virus, it's likely that you are now, because I know a lot of business is being conducted on those platforms. The way that it's similar is that you use a camera and a microphone to communicate between the parties over the internet, and during that process you can get your documents remotely notarized, and that means you can have a notary sitting in Florida, you can have the seller signing the deed sitting in Michigan, you can have the realtor on vacation in Hawaii, you can have the lender in DC, and the witnesses to the document can be their friends from California who they want to be witnesses to their deed for fun. So each party in the transaction can be located in a different place. The only person who has to be located in Florida is the notary itself, or him or herself. So let's talk about kind of the four main things that come up. So first of all, we have identified certain challenges and strategies to get around those challenges, and I want to share those with you. All right, number one, if you have a transaction where the buyer has a loan, of course, the lender has to agree to allow the electronic notarization. Now, prior to COVID-19, there were a relatively small number of lenders that allowed for a remote notarization, and they were slowly coming on board. Now we see the lenders trying to pick that pace up just a little bit. Unfortunately, some of the large institutional lenders, they move kind of slowly, but we do see it's happening. We have more and more lenders who are willing to participate in the process. So once you've got your lender willing to participate, and that is willing to have the person signing the documents be just on a video camera, the next thing you have to evaluate is whether you have the right equipment. Now, this is coming up more than you might expect. Somehow people have the idea that they only have to be on the phone, or they question why they have to have certain computer information or equipment available to them. Obviously, just like Zoom, just like Facebook Live, just like GoToMeeting, the transaction is based on the ability to communicate through a video camera and be heard through the audio, either on the computer or on the camera. So when you go to do your remote online notarization, one of the first things that will happen in the session, and we'll talk about what one of those sessions look like in just a moment, but one of the first things that happens in the session is the company that's facilitating the remote online notarization will send a test to the person intending to sign the document, as well as the other parties in the transaction. They'll send a test to make sure that the equipment on the other end is working properly, because if it does not, unfortunately, the remote online notarization can't move forward. So in addition to the equipment, in addition to the lender having to agree, another sticking point can be identification. So one of the things that we really like about the remote online notarization is it has a several factor identification process. First of all, when you use the remote notarization software, which must be used to comply with Florida law, you hold the driver's license or other photo ID right up against the camera, the front and the back. The software pick some funky thing that I clear a computer person I am not, they are able to very quickly, like instantaneously, know whether that is in fact a valid ID. That's something you really can't do in a person notarization because you know, there's the ability out there to really falsify IDs. And this remote online notarization, this verification step that they take, gets around that, and will stop a lot of that kind of fraud. The other piece, though, that can cause a little bit of a problem is this other factor identification I was telling you about. So very quickly, again, this all happens in just, you know, a blink. The remote online notarization platform software will pop up in front of your signer, and it will ask them to verify certain information. Some of you might be familiar with this in other contexts where you're asked to identify which of these 3 addresses have you not used, which of these loans is actually yours. What the software is able to do, again, nearly instantaneously, is to access public information about the person signing the document, and then they know, based on your credit report and other public records, places you've lived, loans that you've had, and they're going to ask these questions. And unfortunately, if you can't pass this part of the identification process, the whole thing fails. There's really no way around this two-factor identification. Where that can be a problem is if people are forgetful about where they've lived before, about what loans that they've had, or if they don't have a whole lot of credit history to begin with. Not enough information for the software to pull to be able to verify standards that you are in fact who you say you are. So let us assume that you get through this identification process. You've answered those questions, your ID comes back clean. The next thing that will happen is a screen will come up and you will be presented with documents to review, or it'll ask you to download documents to review. Those are the documents that have been uploaded by usually your title company that need to be notarized. Now, in some instances, all the documents in the transaction will be uploaded, including those documents that only need to have an e-signature. So in any closing, there's always documents that need to be notarized, but there's always even more documents that don't need notarization. Those documents can be handled by the closing agent just as a regular DocuSign, any electronic signature. The online notarization process is not required for those documents. Again, if there's no notary block, we're just going the old-fashioned, well, not so old-fashioned, I guess, but we're just going the standard DocuSign process, or another vendor that does the same thing. So once you're ready, the notarization documents will be available to you. The signer is asked to read them. When the signer is ready, the remote online notarization person will pop up on the screen along with all of the other participants in the transaction. So you end up with kind of a Brady Bunch lineup of the signer, the notary, the closing agent, the lender, sometimes the realtor, the witnesses. All of these folks are on the screen at the same time, being able to be seen and heard. Each of those people has to have the equipment that I talked to you about, that basic equipment at a certain technological level that I don't understand. I can just basically tell you, if you have really old things, really old cameras, really old computers, it's going to be a challenge. But everybody on the video call needs to have that good video and audio access. And once everybody is established, then the notarization proceeds like you would expect. The notary will click through the document virtually with his mouse or keyboard, and the signer signs it electronically by clicking. You're able to establish a signature at the very beginning of the process as the signer. You can either upload a graphic of your own signature, or you can create one that is an electronic signature that will be used. You also create initials, whether you use your own graphic upload or choose theirs. But once you're ready, much like DocuSign, for those you know it, it's kind of a point and click situation where you acknowledge reading the document, and then of course you sign it. And then once the process is complete, The document is electronically stamped by the remote online notary. Now, one thing that's really cool about this process is once a document has been digitally notarized, it's nearly impossible to tamper with without being caught. And when I say nearly impossible, I mean at this stage, you'd have to have bad guys with a level of sophistication that, far, far surpasses, most of us for sure and certain. So in some ways, because it requires this two-factor identification we talked about, and because it's harder to tamper with a document once it's completed, in some ways the remote online notarization is actually safer and more reliable than an in-person closing. Now, once the notarization process is complete, then every action is sent one in the transaction notarization session, because the entire thing is recorded. That's part of the rules. So everyone will get a recording of the notarization session along with a copy of the document to the relevant people of the document that was signed. Those digital copies, of course, you can print out a paper version if you'd like, but most people, of course, just save that on their computer. Once the documents have been sent out electronically to all the parties, then you have, of course, the next step, which is recording. Unfortunately, remote online notarization does not work if you're in a county that does not allow electronic recordings. Presently, where we practice most often, Lake County and Orange County are no problem. More coming online as time goes on. So if this is something that you're considering during this COVID crisis, or for any other reason you have a client where it would be more convenient for them to have their documents notarized online, reach out to your closing agent ahead of time so that they can verify whether it's going to be available in the county at issue, and be available if it's a buyer according to that particular lender. So make sure your customers, you can't promise it's going to work, but you can promise that you'll try. And if it meets these requirements that I just went through, there's no reason that the online notarization can't take place. Now, of course, it's much easier to remotely online notarize the seller documents, the deed and the similar documents the seller signs, because you don't have to have lender approval. Just the seller, him or herself, that has to have the equipment and the ability to participate in the online session. Now, of course, I get lots of questions about price. The prices vary depending on the third-party vendor that's used. Generally speaking, it's about $175 per document. Sometimes if you have multiple documents, there's a discount on multiple documents. Clearly, if you have an entire loan package, it's not going to cost $175 per document. But again, that's something you're going to want to reach out to your closing agent ahead of time to find out the price you're looking at as your customer considers whether this is a process that's going to work for them or not. Now, I have heard some rumors on the internet, and I've had some questions about whether parties in the transaction can refuse to allow the other party to participate or sign documents online. And the answer to that actually is no. It's a legally recognized process under the Florida statutes. So there can be no objection, for example, by a seller if the buyer wants to sign their documents electronically. Similarly, by the buyer, if the seller wants to sign their documents electronically. That would be kind of like expecting or thinking that you can demand that a party use a black pen in order to have a valid agreement. It's just not something that's allowed. I've seen people try to do it. And I think those folks that are trying to do that probably don't have an understanding of the fact that really in a remotely notarized document is probably safer, probably protects their interest better for the reasons I just gave, because of that extra identification process and because those documents are so difficult to tamper with. So let me go through my notes real quick just to make sure I didn't miss anything, because I'm trying to keep these short. I think that's about it. I'm excited that it's that we've been kind of pushed into this process more than I thought thought we would be, because I think it's going to be something that's very convenient for everyone going forward, busy professionals and others that have a hard time or it's inconvenient to go to an in-person closing. If you have any questions about anything that we've talked about, as always, you can reach out to me. My name is Merideth Nagel. I'm from Merideth Nagel, PA, and Concierge Title. I can be reached at 352-394-7408. You're free to private message me or get me by email. For those of you who have my email address, it's meredith.nagel. For those of you who don't, it's meredith.nagel@mnagellaw.com, and notice my unusual spelling of my first name. But however you need to get me. I'll be glad to answer any questions. Any of my team can answer any questions. We are doing these. It's working. We just need to have everybody in the transaction have realistic expectations and be able to educate their customers on what to expect throughout the process. So thanks for listening to our second in our series of Homeschool for Realtors. If you're not a realtor and this information was sent to you, I hope it's helpful for you so you can might be available to you in a real estate or any other transaction where a notary is required. So give me a call if I can be of assistance. Stay safe there, guys, and we will see you on our next edition next week. Have a great day.